All right. Well, let's move on, gents, to rugby. Yes, this weekend a much better weekend for the South African sides, Karen. Lions again, head of steam. Elton Yankees. I was just looking at the stats from the weekend. He was the top point scorer, and interestingly, two of our kickers. So Pollard is the top point scorer of the season, but in terms of tries, our top try scorer is Boehm Princely from the Cheetahs in fourth place. So that just sort of showed me that again we're not scoring enough tries.
No, lots to talk about obviously this weekend. The Lions, as you say, they kept their chances alive. Cheetahs absolutely hopeless. It was a little bit easier actually than I thought in the end. We got the Sharks winning at last their final tour game against the Reds. Bulls going down again. Their season's sort of imploding a little bit. They're in danger now of completely missing out on the playoffs, and not only just, but by a good few points. And then obviously the Stormers, strange match against the Rebels. They did pick up the 4 points. A lot of us chatting before.
But again, failing to get the fourth try.
Failing to score that all-important bonus point. It's difficult to say if it's going to be costly at the end of the season, but hopefully not from a Stormers point of view. They just don't seem to be scoring enough tries, putting the game away early in the first half, and then relaxing a little bit in the second. It always seems to be an 80-minute struggle. Even as late as the 65th minute, we're still kicking penalties to make sure we're more than 14 points or 2 scores ahead of the Rebels in case they might come back and beat us. Strange match. A couple of the tries, fairly easy, gifted to the Stormers in the first half in particular. The Rebels, they certainly came to play. They're certainly better than they have been in the past. I don't think they've ever won a match in South Africa. I think that was their 8th or 9th consecutive defeat. So looking at that, you'd think the Stormers would have put them away quite easily. But anyhow, all said and done, the Stormers top of the South African Conference. If they win their remaining matches, they will finish top. Then it's really a case of do we finish second or third in the overall log. Second, obviously, far better than third. Gives you an extra week off. But at the moment, it's our destiny is sort of in the Brumbies and Waratahs' hands, depending how well they do in their remaining matches. If they win them all, they'll finish second. Hurricanes, all but assured of the top spot. So it still could be a tricky end to the season. We've got some banana peel matches coming up. The Cheetahs at home, as I just said, they're pretty hopeless, but they did beat us in Bloemfontein. Then the Lions, who will have a lot to play for, and then the Sharks, who might be on a bit of a resurgence. They like I said, beat the Reds, playing the Rebels. They'll start as favourites this coming weekend, and then they finish off against the Stormers, which could well decide where the Stormers finish in the log.
Rob, anything that stood out for you this weekend?
I suppose the Sharks getting a much needed win was one pleasing development from a South African point of view. Bearing in mind that the Springbok season isn't too far away, you kind of wanted to see a few senior Sharks players finally really sort of standing up. A few of them have been a bit disappointing. They've sort of, their form has imploded along with the fortunes of the team, which has been a little bit damaging from a Springbok point of view. But I thought Bismarck du Plessis produced an absolutely rousing game. He was hugely responsible for that, for them gutsing out a win against the Reds. It certainly wasn't a pretty game, but they got stuck in when it mattered. It was real sort of trench warfare, and Bismarck du Plessis loves those sort of games. He was monumental in terms of turnovers, tackling, just his general physicality and aggression and work rate. And it was actually constructive aggression. I made the point that he managed to avoid niggle and the situation where he often gets into trouble with red and yellow cards and so on. He tended to sort of come out of physical situations with a smile on his face, which was good to see. It showed that he's kind of focusing on his rugby again since he's been taken away from the captaincy. So that for me was quite a pleasing hallmark. We know the Sharks are right out of the picture, but it'll be nice for their long-suffering fans if they do in fact end the season on a strong note.
I guess perhaps another talking point was again some sort of dodgy officiating. I mean, Coetzee lucky not to get a red card as an example. And just another thing I wanted to touch on was some of the Australian bloopers this weekend. As I mentioned earlier, how South African sides, probably not scoring enough tries. Australians also seem to be a bit all over the show.
Yeah, it's you know, the Australian challenge is not looking particularly good. As Garen mentioned, the way the Rebels gave away a try just before half time, they'd put in such a staunch first half showing. They'd really got stuck into the Stormers, rattled them just a little bit, and I think the score was something like, you know, there were only sort of 4 or 5 points in it until well after the half time siren. They gave an absolute present. You could call it Alistair Coetzee's birthday present, because it was his birthday on Saturday, and gifting them that try. That was really what that 18-7 lead was what really made sure that the Stormers were not gonna botch that one. So the Aussies. It's going to be a touch and go. We know that some of their sides are right out of the picture.
Yeah.
Waratahs and Brumbies still hanging in there. I still think that perhaps both of them will sneak into the playoffs, leaving perhaps only space for one South African team, because 3 New Zealand teams are almost certain to go through. So that's a bit of a concern, that a fairly weak Australian conference may even have slight bragging rights over South Africa come the end of ordinary season, which tells you that our teams are not exactly great shakes at the moment.
Right, guys, thank you.
Thanks, Nick.